Welcome to my lecture on ecosystem services, concept and methods. My name is Esther Robbe and I'm working at the Leibniz-Institute for Baltic Sea Research Warnemünde and at Klaipeda University in Lithuania. After having a short introduction into the topic, we will have a further look on the concept, its definition and classifications. We will also learn about methods of assessment and evaluation for ecosystem services, and I will give you a concrete example on an integrative assessment for sandy beaches in the Baltic, but also in the Mediterranean Sea. We will finish with a short summary and some lessons learned, what we learned in this lecture. Ecosystem services is a quite fast-growing and new developing scientific field since the 90s. It arose out of the need of nature conservation and arose out of the field of ecologic economics. Similar as in the scientific community, also the interest in the topic increased significantly in the policy implementation and on policy level. This is, for example, within the Water Framework Directive and also in the biodiversity strategy documents. Why is this also relevant for society? We are using our ecosystems. Especially our coasts are intensively used. Here, for example, by tourism. Tourism is a possible driver for pollution. Pollution can be quite a high pressure on ecosystems, which, on the other hand, leads consequently to the fact that the ecosystem state is also degrading, here, for example, by marine litter, and the water quality is decreasing, which leads in the end to the impact that tourists are also decreasing in numbers. Tourists are annoyed by pollution, and in the end, this leads to the fact that we have to protect, conserve, and preserve our ecosystem services and ecosystems, which makes it necessary to have a sustainable coastal management. Coming now to the concept. Here we have the socio-ecological system. On the one hand, we have the society. On the other hand, we have the ecosystem. These two components are in constant interaction to each other and with each other. The ecosystem is, for example, providing certain goods and services, which could be water or fish stocks, but also just a natural, beautiful landscape. The society, on the other hand, is using and benefiting directly from these ecosystem provisions. We have hikers going through the mountains. We have recreational angling, but also offshore wind parks and wind energy. All of these benefits and uses are called ecosystem services. And if this concept of ecosystem services is a suitable tool to support coastal management and how it can be supportive in the understanding of socio-ecological system and human-nature relations, we will have a look on the next slides. First of all, some general definitions. As it is still quite new scientific concept and developing, we don't have one general definition or classification. However, I brought you the most important ones, which are ecosystem services are described as the benefits that people derive from the ecosystems, but also as a direct and indirect contributions that the ecosystems deliver to the human well-being. And more recent publications are also referring to ecosystem services as contributions of ecosystem structure and function, also with regard to the human well-being. Coming now to the classifications. There are several classification schemes, and I will show you three most important ones. Starting with the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in 2005, followed by the TEP, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity in 2009, and then finally also the CISIS classification, which is the Common International Classification of Ecosystem Services. There are much more classifications, but we will focus here on CISIS because it was developed by the European Environmental Agency, which was working on the environmental accounting, and it was developed to have a systematic approach to name and describe ecosystem services. As it is most used within Europe, we will have a further look on this now. So, the sizes has three main categories, or also called sections. We have the provisioning services, we have the regulating and maintenance services, and the so-called cultural services. As I said, it's a systematic approach, and it is working with a hierarchical structure. For example, we take the mussels for aquaculture, the provisioning service. This belongs to the section of provisioning, and further subdividing this into the nutrition division, into the biomass group. Then it is on class level categorized as reared aquatic animals and class typed for mussels by in situ aquaculture. How can we assess this? Mussel ecosystem services. This is the easiest indicators I brought you today, which is, for example, the amount of harvested mussels or animals in tons per year, for example. But also the economic value, which is the value of total aquaculture sales. Then I would like to show you some more examples for the services, starting with the provisioning services, which are all nutritional, non-nutritional material, and energetic outputs. We have different divisions, which are the food and nutrition division, fish, wheat, milk, but also groundwater as drinking water. We have materials for direct use, but also for further processing as timber or fibers. Here we also have the genetic material for further extraction. Another subdivision is the energy section, which could be the biomass itself, but also wind, wave, or solar energy. Next section is the regulating and maintenance services. These services mediate, regulate, or moderate the environment, always with regard to the human health, safety, and comfort. Some examples are the major division of mediation of waste and toxics, which could be the bioremediation, but also the filtration function. The second division is the regulation of biophysical, chemical, and biological conditions. The easiest example here is the mediation of flows, which could be the control of erosion rates and thus the flood control. Here we also have the life cycle maintenance, but also biodiversity function. And last but not least, the cultural services. These are all services that are non-material, non-rival, and non-consumptive. They always reflect the physical and mental health of humans. Here we have two major sections or divisions, which are the direct, in situ, and outdoor activities. For example, outdoor sports, bird watching, but also educational and research activities. The second division is more on the indirect, remote, and indoor activities, which could be more symbolic, but also spiritual value. Here also the intrinsic value of nature is included. Now that we learned definitions and classification of the systems, I would like to draw your attention into the methods. So how can we actually assess certain services? I already gave you some examples, so we have three options. First, monetary. Second, biophysical. And third, the socio-cultural assessment methods. Which methods we are going to use highly depends on certain criteria, which are first, what purpose do I have for my assessment? Second, what data availability do I have? And in the end also, what kind of desired output am I aiming to? Having this in mind, we will start now with the monetary evaluation methods. First of all, monetary evaluation methods were the first developed, most tested, and most used over time. Nowadays, however, these methods are quite controversial because they give a certain price tag on nature and do not value the intrinsic value of nature. Here I bring you some examples of methods, but I will focus on the first three and give you concrete examples in the next slide, which are the market price exchange-based method, the revealed and the stated preference methods. Okay, let's have a look at the provisioning service of mussels from aquaculture. The market-priced method is quite easy. We go to the market, to the food market, and check here, in this case, for blue mussels. How much is a blue mussel worth on the consumer market? We go to that market and buy it for 6 to 10 euros per kilogram, here, for example, in Germany. If we have a look now to the recreational activities and cultural services, we have to admit we cannot go to the market price because these products or services are not marketable. We cannot go to the market and check for the price. So we need some other methods and indicators. One possible option is the revealed preference method, which is, for example, here in Warnemünde Beach, Rostock, we have some tourist taxes, which means tourists pay 2.25 euros per day as a tourist tax, which can be an indicator for the value of this beach tourism ecosystem service. Another option for the beach tourism is, for example, the exchange-based method. The beaches are cleaned regularly because of the tourists, because of the beach tourism. We can calculate the cleanup costs at these beaches, which can be an indicator, again, for the recreational and cultural services of beach tourism. Here, for example, it costs 38 euros per meter, managed beach at the Baltic Sea. And the third example I brought is the nature observation service, which is the stated preference method. We go to people, we go to nature observers and ask them, how much are you actually willing to pay for spending a day at the beach to do your nature observation as a recreational activity? All in all, with regard to the monetary evaluations, it has to be said that the indicators and methods are not suitable for all ecosystem services due to the availability of data, but also due to the characteristics of the services. For example, the mussel that is on the market and the beach tourism that you cannot buy as a product itself. Coming now to the next approach, which is the biophysical assessment methods. Here we can differentiate between the mapping and the modeling approaches. I will only focus here on the simple matrix approach and give you one concrete example, which is the simple matrix approach here by Müller et al., which is the main purpose of providing a tool for sustainability management. We have a spreadsheet-based approach where we have on the top the different land cover types, here the coastal ecosystem types, for example sandy beach, but also dunes. These are linked to certain expert scores on the other hand, which are lying behind every ecosystem service. This linked and combined spreadsheet can be translated then into an ecosystem service mapping approach. Therefore, here we have a very nice example of an integrative approach combining scientific data, land use cover types with expert scores and stakeholder values. Coming now to the third approach, which are the socio-cultural assessment methods. Here I also will focus on one method, which are the preference methods. Here we can gather different perceptions, different knowledge and values of people by asking them, by carrying out surveys. Here we, for example, used some photos asking people, how do you prefer, or which beach do you prefer, and what activity do you prefer at which beach? Before I go into detail of one example now, I would like to give you a short overview of the methodological comparison. Here are some strengths and weaknesses of each approach. With regards to the monetary approach, for example, this one is the most used, tested and harmonized method. Therefore, it has a high comparability and transparency. It can easily serve as an indicator for decision making to really show the value of the nature by putting the price tag, which on the other hand is also similarly a weakness as you put nature on a price tag. Another weakness is that you can only assess single services here. As well, you need a lot of time and effort for these methods, and the results highly depend on the socio-cultural settings. Coming now to the biophysical assessments, this one allows for easy and fast visualizations by mapping, for example. It can support the stakeholder involvement and is spatially explicit. This, together with the socio-cultural methods, can assess multiple services. On the other hand, most weaknesses are that there's a high dependency on expert data, but also an oversimplification. And finally, the socio-cultural services assessment methods. It's fast and easy. It can be done remotely and, most important, for stakeholder involvement, decision-making, awareness raising. On the other hand, the most important weakness here is that there's always a high subjectivity. We have a limited reliability and a low comparability among studies. Now I would like to show you one more in-depth example, which is the integrative assessment of sandy beaches at the Baltic Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. Here you see a very crowded beach. Therefore, often at beaches globally, the recreational and cultural ecosystem services are in the focus. Beaches are often reduced to them. However, beaches also provide a much wider range of ecosystem services. They are, for example, accumulation zones for beach wreck. On the other hand, there are also accumulation zones for plastics, for pollution, for marine litter. Combining all these three aspects, it is necessary, or it makes it obvious, that we need a certain beach management, which includes high costs of cleaning. Therefore, an integrative approach of socio-cultural, monetary, and biophysical assessment methods are needed here for sustainable beach management. Our integrative approach now is following the objective to apply a holistic, integrated, and multidisciplinary assessment. Our aim is to assess the impact of beach wreck and litter, and we are having a look at two different study sites. We have the Baltic Sea, where a low state of pollution exists, but the main problem more often is the beach wreck. The southern Mediterranean beaches, here we have a high state of pollution, which is the main problem. With this approach, we are combining now different methods, which is the expert-based assessment, the combined data-based or literature-based assessment, as well as a monetary approach by relating our data to the monetary assessment of cleanup costs and the high beach management costs. We developed scenarios to assess the impact. To assess the ecosystem services, we developed first a baseline scenario. This baseline scenario is a clean managed beach. This we compare now to scenario 1, 2, and 3, which show different amounts of beach wreck and marine litter. This can easily be adapted to local case studies, but also to other management measures. Based on these scenarios that we developed, we did a comparative assessment including experts. We asked experts to assess and compare the scenarios by giving us a relative importance for each ecosystem service for the sandy beach. We asked them to give us an impact factor comparing the baseline scenario to scenario 1, 2, and 3 by giving them a certain scoring scheme. After that, the experts did the assessments individually and remotely. We combined it within an online workshop and discussion. Now we're coming to the more integrative part, which is that we also compared our data here with the expert and stakeholder involvement with the database and literature-based assessment. So we combined the qualitative with the quantitative data. Yeah, so this integrative approach can very nicely show that we can draw some conclusions and recommendations for sustainable beach management. Here, for example, we can give recommendations to leave the beach wreck where it is landed naturally. We can recommend to clean or remove litter with the lowest pressure possible. If you remove beach wreck, then use synergies and use it as a valuable resource. We recommend to develop new and innovative cleaning techniques and procedures, but also to focus on acceptance and awareness raising. And last but not least, also to include future indirect costs, for example, costs for coastal protection measures. And we can also conclude for this integrative assessment approach that it is an easy to apply and fast, highly adaptive approach. You can use it online and remote. It shows and compares different management measures and impacts. Therefore, we see it as a very suitable tool for participatory stakeholder involvement, awareness raising, and consensus building within coastal management. For an overall summary now of the lecture Concepts and Methods of Ecosystem Services, we learned the 3 different assessment approaches: socio-cultural, biophysical, and monetary. We learned that the ecosystem service approach is a holistic and interdisciplinary concept. We can use it very nicely to understand the interactions between socio-ecological interactions and nature-human conflicts. Therefore, we see it as a useful concept for sustainability management and policy implementation. However, there are also some challenges, which are, for example, the low comparability and transparency of results, but also how to choose an appropriate assessment method. For example, depending on the purpose, on the data availability, and on your desired output. Another important point I would like to draw in the end is also that this concept is a very anthropocentric concept, often neglecting the value of nature. Therefore, our final conclusion and recommendation is to follow an integrative approach when assessing ecosystem services, combining different methods, including the socio-economic, monetary, and biophysical assessments. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.